The text is John, the 5th chapter, verses 5 through 9. It's the third sign that Jesus performed in the Gospel of John. As I've said, in the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're called miracles, but in John's Gospel, they're called signs. Maybe it's just a synonymous way to use sign for miracle. But I think it is a way to indicate that what Jesus was doing was not for us simply to look at what he performed, but to look at the one who performed it and to be drawn to him. And John certainly wanted that to happen in the lives of people. There was a little village called Bethsaida. And in that little village, there was a pool. Around this pool were people who were sick, people who were ill. And the legend was that once in a while, the angel of God came and stirred the waters. The first one in was healed. But one of the men was unable to get to the pool because of his condition. For 38 years, almost 4 decades, he had been lying by the pool there in Bethsaida, waiting for somebody to help him. Suddenly, Jesus appears, a rabbi who is on the move. I have a friend who told me about a sign he saw in a church that said, "Come in and find God." I know those of us who are ministers and those of us who are parts of churches, we realize the importance of a building, but it's not come in and find God. Jesus was a rabbi who was on the move. He had no building. He simply went to where people were in need. He looked at this pathetic man who had been there for 38 years, and Jesus says, "Do you want to get well?" That seems like a strange question. If you've been sick by the pool of Bethsaida for 38 years, don't you assume he wants to get well? What's the response of this man? Frankly, I don't like the response of this man. He doesn't give Jesus an answer. He begins to give Jesus excuses about why he's not been healed. I can't get into the water first. Every time the water is stirred, somebody steps over me and gets into the pool. It's everybody else's fault because they keep beating me to the place where I can get healed. Jesus looks at him and simply says, stand up, take your mat, and walk." And a man who for almost 40 years of his life had not walked, got to his feet, and he walked. Now, there are some things that I have trouble with about this man. One is, you'll notice that there is not a single word of gratitude to Jesus for what he had done. Can you imagine being in that condition and suddenly a person comes and heals you and you get up and there's not a single word of thanks to Jesus? Well, it's not unlike our being by the pool, maybe not in a physical sense, but spiritually, emotionally. You and I find ourselves by the pool. And Jesus comes to heal us. Response: entitlement or gratitude? I remember when I was a child, I've shared some of this with you. My dad was an alcoholic. I had no idea what that word meant. My mother oftentimes would go with him to a bar. He was never physically abusive. In fact, he never drank at home. He always went to the bar and had a bottle of beer. And my mother would go with him sometimes. I remember one night we were living in Miami and we had a screen door. I probably was about 10 years old. My brother was about 2. It was getting dark outside. And suddenly it was pitch black. And my brother was crying. And at 10 years of age, I felt I couldn't cry because I had to take care of him. And then the car my parents drove up. My mother came in and I said, "Mom, I was so afraid. It was getting dark. And Dad and you weren't here." I never will forget what my mother said. She said, "Well, you knew we were coming home." Now, I don't want to paint my mother as somebody who is not caring, because she was caring. I believe at times she just didn't have the way to communicate the care to us. You knew we were coming home, but Mom, it's getting dark out there. And when it gets dark, I'm afraid, and my brother is afraid. Healing of some of the wounds that you and I have experienced in our lives. Tom Long, that wonderful preacher, tells us a story about his daughter. At the time he told the story, his daughter was in her 40s. She had children, Tom's grandchildren. One day, she was with her dad, and she said, "Dad, I will never forget what you said to me one day when I was a teenager. You looked at me and you said, 'Melanie, you're nothing but trouble to me.'" Tom Long said, "I don't remember saying that. That doesn't even sound like me." But for all of this time, my daughter has been trying to take the poison dart of something that I said out of her heart. "Melanie, you're nothing but trouble to me." It is learning, despite what happens to us in the formative parts of our lives, can we learn to be grateful? Can we learn to trust? Can we learn to depend upon God? Or are we spending all of our lives simply reaching into the poison of the past, pulling it into the present, and letting it poison us for all of our days? "Mom, it was getting dark." "Well, you knew that we would be home." And I don't think she understood what darkness meant to a 10-year-old and a 2-year-old. She loved us, but she just didn't say the words. This man had no words of gratitude to Jesus, no words of thanks. But there's something else about this story, this sign that Jesus tells that bothers me. The man gets up when Jesus tells him to stand up, and he starts walking, and we have no idea from the story where he walked. What do you think? Do you think he said, Jesus, you have given me life. You have taken the brokenness of who I am and put me together. I'm going to follow you every step that I take. But that's nowhere in the Bible story. Jesus, what I'm going to do is I now appreciate the fact what it is to be healed, and I'm going to stay here by the pool, and I'm going to minister. I'm going to be with these people who have nobody to be with them, but not a word about compassion. He simply walks. Maybe he walked to do all of the things he had never not been able to do. Maybe he walked. We don't know. But maybe he just walked away from Jesus and failed to see the sign. I don't know. Sometimes I read this sign in John, and there's a part of me that really doesn't like this man. For goodness sakes, your life has been changed. You are a different person. What about a life of gratitude? You now can walk wherever you want. And as far as we know, that day he was made well. He walked away from the one who had given him his life. I don't know. But the fact is that every one of us has been healed by Jesus in some way. Every one of us has felt his touch. And what I want to know is I think about the hope of my life. Is it in following the one who has made me a new creature? Or do I live my life just taking that for granted? And Jesus, he becomes more and more distant in our lives. I don't know. I hope not. But I've seen it in myself. And maybe you've seen it in yourself. Amen.